The cottage was a husk, its wooden bones creaking under the weight of midnight. Ethan hunched over his typewriter, the keys clacking like brittle leaves underfoot, each word a futile attempt to outrun the silence. Outside, the full moon hung low, a pale eye staring through the fog, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the floor. Then it came Ranger's bark, sharp as a blade slicing through the stillness. It wasn't just sound, it was a summons primal and urgent vibrating in Ethan's chest. He froze, fingers hovering, irritation flaring. Just a dog, he told himself, but the air felt thick, expectant, as if the village held its breath. Ranger's silhouette stood rigid at the window, eyes locked on the moon, and for a moment Ethan swore the shadows leaned closer, listening. The village sprawled below Ethan's hilltop cottage, a cluster of stone houses swallowed by mist. Cobblestones gleamed like wet bones under the moon's gaze, their edges softened by years of forgotten footsteps. The wind howled, rattling the cottage's warped windows, carrying a faint hum like a chant buried in the earth. Ranger paced the garden gate, his black and tan fur rippling, ears twitching as if tracking something beyond sight. His eyes glinting like polished amber, fixed on the moon, unblinking, as if it whispered secrets only he could hear. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the cold biting his skin, and felt exposed as if the night itself watched him. The village seemed to crouch its silence, heavy with something ancient, and the air tasted of iron and old promises. Ethan's mind was a fortress of logic, but cracks were forming, spider-webbing through his thoughts like frost on glass. He leaned against the porch rail, staring at Ranger's unyielding form, and remembered why he'd come here, to bury the ghosts of his past in ink and isolation. A failed novel, a lover lost to the city's chaos. It all blurred into a numb ache he analyzed rather than felt. Dogs bark, he reasoned, it's instinct, nothing more. Yet his hands trembled as he gripped his mug, coffee gone cold, the steam rising like forgotten prayers. Ranger's cries weren't random. They carried a rhythm, a desperation that echoed Ethan's own suppressed grief. He scribbled notes in his journal, phases of the moon, behavioral patterns, but inside doubt gnawed, whispering that reason might not hold against the night's pull. The village lights flickered below, distant and indifferent, mirroring his isolation. What if it's calling to something real? The thought slipped in unbidden, and Ethan shoved it away, but the fortress walls thinned, letting the chill seep deeper. From the shadows at the village's edge, a figure stirred, slight, hunched like a tree bent by years. Ethan squinted, heart-skipping, but dismissed it as a trick of the mist. Ranger's growl rumbled low ears, flattening his body, tensing, as if scenting an intruder from another time. The dog's gaze shifted briefly to Ethan, amber eyes holding a depth that felt almost human, promising alliance in the unknown. Old Man Hawkins, Ethan wondered, recalling the historian's cryptic stares in the market. The figure melted back into the dark, leaving only a faint rustle, but Ranger's stance lingered, a silent vow that change was prowling closer. Ethan turned away, unease coiling in his gut, the night now alive with unspoken warnings. The ink had once flowed like blood from Ethan's veins, each story a pulse of life in the bustling city where dreams were forged in neon glow. He remembered the nights in his cramped apartment, fingers dancing over keys, his partner's laughter echoing as she read drafts aloud, her voice a warm anchor in the storm of deadlines. But tragedy struck like a thief in the fog, a sudden accident, her car swallowed by rain, slicked roads, leaving him with echoes and empty pages. The words dried up then, his analytical mind dissecting the grief into fragments too sharp to hold. He fled the city's pitying stares, packing his typewriter and shattered hopes into a worn suitcase drawn to the village by whispers of forgotten lore, a place where solitude might mend what logic couldn't. Adopting Ranger had been an impulse, a shelter visit on a whim, the dog's haunted eyes mirroring his own, both orphans of circumstance. Now in flashbacks that haunted his sleepless hours, Ethan saw himself as he once was, vibrant, connected before loss carved him hollow. Ranger's barks pulled at those scars, stirring questions he'd buried deep. What if some pains aren't meant to be analyzed? The thought lingered like smoke curling around his guarded heart as the moon watched indifferently from above. Days blurred into a mechanical rhythm in the cottage where dust motes danced in slanted light like forgotten confetti. Ethan rose with the sun brewing coffee that tasted of ash, his fingers tapping out fragments of a novel that refused to cohere. The rooms echoed with absence books stacked like barriers, the typewriter a silent sentinel on the scarred oak desk. He avoided the villagers' curious glances, his walk solitary paths through mist-shrouded fields, mind dissecting every shadow for meaning. Ranger's presence was a subtle fracture in this numbness, the click of nails on wood floors, the weight of watchful eyes from across the room. The dog's barks shattered the routine like cracks in ice, forcing Ethan to pause, notebook in hand, rationalizing the anomaly as lunar phases or instinct. Yet in those moments, the cottage felt less like a refuge and more like a cage, its walls pressing in with unspoken accusations. Why fight the silence when it's all that's left? Ethan wondered, his defenses a fragile armor against the dog's enigmatic gaze. Ranger's fur bore the map of his torment, faded scars snaking across his flanks like rivers carved by forgotten storms, a notched ear whispering of battles lost. He had come from the shadows of a distant shelter, papers listing him as stray aggressive, but his eyes held depths no file could capture, amber pools swirling with secrets too ancient for a mere dog. In implied flashes through his tense posture, Ranger remembered the chain that bound him, the shadowy figure who abandoned him under a blood moon, cursing his lineage with a whisper that echoed through generations. His ancestors were guardians bred to protect a hidden treasure buried in myth, their barks a key to realms unseen. But betrayal twisted the gift into a curse, forcing each descendant to call out at midnight, a ritual that drained their spirit, leaving them hollow vessels of loyalty and mistrust. Ranger's survival instinct was a blade sharp and unyielding. He flinched at sudden movements, his growl a barrier against the world. Yet in quiet moments lying on the cottage floor, his breaths came ragged, as if carrying the weight of untold stories. The abuse had marked him not just physically with limps on cold nights, but emotionally, his tail tucked in perpetual caution. He watched Ethan with a gaze that mirrored the man's own emptiness, sensing a kindred fracture, but trust was a luxury stolen long ago. The moon's pull was relentless, drawing out his voice like a confession, each bark a plea for release from the invisible chains. Ranger wasn't just a dog, he was a relic scarred and mysterious, his pain a silent echo of Ethan's unspoken grief. In the dim glow of the cottage lamp, Ethan paced the creaking floorboards, his shadow merging with Ranger's as the dogs circled restlessly, their movements a mirrored dance of unrest. Neither sought contact, yet their shared silence wove an invisible thread fragile as spider silk. Ethan's late-night scribbles, notes on lunar cycles, half-formed theories reflected Ranger's vigilant scans of the windows, both guarding against intrusions they couldn't name. The man's isolation was self-imposed, a wall built from grief's debris, while the dog's wariness stemmed from betrayal's bite. But in their quiet coexistence, parallels emerged like stars through clouds. Ranger's scarred flank twitched in sleep, dreaming of chains, just as Ethan's fists clenched at memories of loss, their pains resonating in unspoken harmony. A dropped pen rolled across the floor, and Ranger's eyes flicked open, meeting Ethan's amber to hazel, a fleeting recognition of mutual voids. No words passed. No gestures bridged the gap, but the air softened the cottage, less a prison and more a shared sanctuary. Their healing hinted at symbiosis. Ethan's logic probing Ranger's mystery, the dog's loyalty chipping at the man's defenses. In those moments, emptiness wasn't solitude, but a canvas waiting for trust to paint the first stroke. The fog rolled in like a shroud, thick and cloying, turning the village into a spectral dream under the full moon's unblinking stare. Ranger's bark erupted sharper this night, a guttural crescendo that vibrated through the cottage walls, pulling Ethan from his chair with a jolt. Outside, the dog stood like a statue carved from shadow hackles, raised eyes blazing with an intensity that bordered on the unearthly. The air hummed with unnatural tension, whispers in the wind, or perhaps echoes from the woods beyond, slithering through the mist like fingers grasping for secrets. Ethan's heart hammered, logic fracturing under the visual assault. Ranger's form, silhouetted against the glowing orb, his growl layering with a distant answering howl that chilled the blood. Something watched from the fog's depths, unseen but palpable, heightening the urgency as Ethan stepped forward, the night closing in like a predator. Ethan's mind waged war in the fog-shrouded yard logic, a stern sentinel against the tide of instinct surging within. It's nothing. A wolf's echo, a trick of acoustics, he argued inwardly, fingers clenching the flashlight like a talisman. Fear coiled tight memories of his lost love, flashing her warnings about chasing shadows in his stories, urging retreat to the safety of his desk. Yet Ranger's urgency pierced the veil, the dog's rigid stance a silent plea that tugged at Ethan's curiosity, whispering of truths buried beyond reason. Compassion clashed with caution. What if ignoring this meant abandoning the dog to his torment? A faint howl sliced the night again, tipping the scale. Ethan's analytical walls crumbled slightly, instinct winning as he whispered just this once, stepping toward the unknown. Ethan's hand trembled as he snatched the flashlight from the porch hook, its beam cutting a jagged path through the fog like a hesitant blade. Heart thudding in erratic rhythm, he approached Ranger the dog's ears, perking at his movement, a low whine escaping as if urging haste. The overgrown path beyond the gate beckoned, weeds whispering against his legs as Ranger bolted ahead, pausing at intervals to glance back, eyes glowing in the light. Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts, the air heavy with damp earth and something metallic unnatural. They reached a clearing where a stone marker loomed, etched with runes that seemed to pulse faintly under the moon. Kneeling, Ethan traced the symbols, a chill racing up his spine, not from cold but from the dawning realization that Ranger wasn't lost. He was leading. The act was raw, impulsive, a leap from the safety of skepticism into the abyss of possibility, irreversible as a door slamming shut behind him. At the marker's base, Ranger sat with an eerie composure, his chest rising and falling in steady cadence, gaze fixed on Ethan as if measuring the man's resolve. The runes under Ethan's fingers felt alive, thrumming with a subtle vibration that hummed through his bones, the fog parting just enough to reveal their intricate swirls like veins mapping a forgotten curse. He whispered a vow, half to the night, half to the dog. "We'll figure this out, boy, whatever it is." Ranger's tail gave a single deliberate flick, not wag, but acknowledgement, his head tilting as if sealing the words into memory. Ethan rose, the flashlight beam steadying, and in that moment, a tentative bond sparked, Ranger stepping closer, brushing against his leg with cautious warmth. The night seemed to exhale, the whispers fading, but the pact hung heavy, a promise woven from curiosity and fragile trust binding them to the mystery's unraveling threads. The cottage settled into a tense equilibrium, its air thick with unspoken boundaries, like a truce drawn in invisible ink. Ranger claimed the far corner by the hearth, his body curled but eyes ever vigilant, a low growl rumbling like distant thunder whenever Ethan's footsteps ventured too near. The dog's fur bristled scars, catching the firelight like jagged constellations, his posture a fortress of mistrust built from years of shadows. Ethan moved with deliberate slowness, placing the food bowl at arm's length, murmuring soft nothings. "Easy boy, no rush," his voice a gentle ripple in the standoff. He retreated to his desk, the typewriter's clack, a rhythmic barrier, but his gaze drifted to Ranger, noting the dog's guarded glances, amber eyes flicking like wary flames. Notes accumulated in piles, sketches of runes, timelines of barks synced to lunar phases, questions scrawled in margins. Why the moon? What calls you? The room felt charged, a silent negotiation where neither dared bridge the gap first. Ranger's ears twitched at every creak, his breath steady but shallow, while Ethan's internal monologue churned. He's like me, walls up waiting for the betrayal. Evenings stretched long, the moon peeking through curtains like a voyeur illuminating their mutual isolation. Food went untouched at first, then nibbled in solitude Ranger's muzzle, dipping only when Ethan turned away. The standoff lingered, a dance of patience where proximity was measured in inches, gained trust, a whisper not yet voiced. Sensory details sharpened the tension, the scent of wet fur after rain, the scratch of claws on wood, the faint warmth from the fire that never quite reached their cores. Ethan wondered if Ranger sensed his own fractures, the way grief hollowed him, like wind eroding stone. Yet, neither initiated content or resigned to observe from afar the cottage, a stage for their cautious vigil. Moonlight filtered through the grimy window, like spilled mercury pooling on the floor where Ranger lay, his paw extended awkwardly, a fresh-cut weeping crimson against his dark fur. Ethan approached with a bowl of water and cloth, heart thudding like a muffled drum, his movements slow as molasses to avoid the growl that had become their ritual. Ranger flinched at the first touch, muscles coiling like springs, but then stillness, a profound quiet that spoke volumes, his amber eyes locking onto Ethan's with a depth that pierced the veil of separation. The cloth dabbed gently, water trickling in rivulets carrying away dirt and blood, the metallic tang mingling with the cottage's musty air. Ethan's mind raced. He's letting me near, why now? A pang stirred within, mirroring his own unhealed wounds, the grief that festered like an open sore. They shared a meal afterward, Ethan tearing bits of bread and meat, placing them midway, Ranger's nose twitching before advancing his gaze, never leaving the man's face. The moonlight bathed them, synchronizing their breaths, inhale-exhale in a rhythm that felt like an unspoken confession. Sensory immersion deepened the warmth of Ranger's fur under tentative fingers, the soft huff of his breath, the faint tremor in Ethan's hand betraying his vulnerability. No words passed, but in that shared silence, pain echoed between them, a bridge forming from mutual scars. Ranger didn't pull away his stillness, a fragile gift, and Ethan felt the first crack in his armor, a quiet acknowledgement that they were no longer alone in their shadows. A coffee mug slipped from Ethan's grasp, shattering on the hardwood with a crack, like thunder, dark liquid spreading like spilled ink across the floor. The sound triggered a cascade in his mind. Flashbacks to that rainy night, the phone call's hollow ring announcing his partner's accident. Her voice forever silenced in his stories. His fists, clenched knuckles, whitening breath hitching as grief surged unbidden and raw. Across the room, Ranger startled, his bark sharp and sudden at a flickering shadow on the wall body, tensing as if reliving chains snapping in the dark, the abandonment under a mocking moon. The dog's head lowered, ears flattening, a whine escaping that mirrored Ethan's stifled sob. In that parallel fracture, their eyes met Ethan's. Hazel blurred with tears, Ranger's amber softened with recognition. The man knelt to clean the shards, fingers trembling, and Ranger didn't retreat. Instead, he inched forward, pausing just beyond reach, his presence a quiet anchor. No touch yet, but the air hummed with connection memories weaving between them like threads in a tapestry. Ethan whispered, "You get it, don't you?" And Ranger's tail gave a faint twitch, the first bridge over their chasms of pain. The cottage felt smaller, warmer, as subtle shifts built, Ranger lingering near the desk. Ethan speaking aloud, his theories, their wounds echoing in harmony, trust budding from shared echoes of loss. Sunlight pierced the cottage curtains like hesitant fingers, casting golden pools on the floor, where Ethan tossed a worn tennis ball, its bounce echoing softly against the walls. Ranger's ears, perked body coiling with caution, but then a hesitant chase pause skittering across woodtail, wagging in faint tentative arcs. The air lightened, the musty scent of books mingling with fresh earth from the open window, as Ethan laughed, a rusty sound breaking free after months of silence, warming his chest like embers stirred. Ranger paused, ball in mouth, eyes softening from wary amber to something gentler, dropping it at Ethan's feet with a soft thud. The man knelt, hand extended slowly, and Ranger accepted a scratch behind the ears, leaning in ever so slightly, his fur warm under fingertips. Evenings transformed, they sat by the fire, Ranger's head tilting at Ethan's murmured stories, the moon outside no longer a tyrant, but a soft glow. Trust sparked in small rituals, Ranger taking treats from Ethan's palm, calloused skin brushing wet nose, the contact electric yet soothing. Ethan felt the ice in his veins thaw, his writing flowing freer, inspired by the dog's quiet resilience. Laughter came easier, warmth seeping into the space like dawn after endless night, their bond a flickering flame against the encroaching shadows. Sensory details enveloped them, the crackle of logs, the dog's steady breath, the faint wag echoing Joy's first whispers. Ranger's eyes held less, haunt more light, as the cottage bloomed into a haven, their shared moments weaving hope from the threads of past despair. Thunder roared like a beast unchained, the storm lashing the cottage windows with sheets of rain that blurred the world into a watery veil. Ethan huddled on the couch, blanket clutched tight, his mind a whirlwind of half-formed theories and resurfacing grief. the lightning flashes illuminating his tense features like stark revelations. Ranger paced restlessly, ears flattened against the cracks of thunder, his body trembling not from cold, but from echoes of past tempests, abandonment in the downpour, chains rattling in the gale. Then in a moment that hung suspended like a breath, Ranger leaped onto the couch, his weight settling beside Ethan with a soft thud, fur brushing against the man's arm in deliberate contact. Ethan froze, heart swelling with a mix of awe and vulnerability, his hand hovering before descending gently onto Ranger's back, fingers sinking into the warm, damp coat. The dog didn't tense or pull away. Instead, he leaned in a deep sigh, escaping as his head rested on Ethan's thigh, amber eyes closing in rare surrender. Tears pricked Ethan's eyes hot and unbidden, spilling over as he whispered, "You chose me." The words cracking with emotion. The storm raged outside, but within a sacred hush enveloped them, the scent of wet earth and dog mingling with the crackle of the dying fire, Ranger's steady heartbeat syncing with Ethan's erratic one. This initiation shattered barriers. Ranger's lick on Ethan's hand, a tentative but profound gesture signaling full emotional yield. Ethan's sobs softened to quiet breaths, the dog's presence a balm on old wounds, their bond crystallizing in the tempest's fury. Sensory immersion deepened the intimacy, the rumble of thunder vibrating through their joined forms, the faint musk of fur, the warmth spreading like a promise. Ranger's tail thumped once softly as if affirming the choice, and Ethan felt the weight of isolation lift, replaced by a fragile burgeoning wholeness. The night wore on, the storm subsiding to drips and sighs, but the moment lingered, a turning point etched in vulnerability where trust wasn't given, but chosen, binding man and dog in unbreakable quiet. The village air thickened with an intangible malaise, the moon's glow casting elongated shadows that seemed to slither across the cobblestones like watchful serpents. Ranger's barks sharpened at midnight, no longer mere calls, but edged with a primal urgency, his eyes darting to the encroaching woods where branches rustled without wind. Ethan noticed the shift's scratched earth near the rune marker unearthed like frantic warnings, and a faint ethereal glow pulsing at the witching hour, illuminating faint paw prints that weren't Ranger's. The dog's posture stiffened, ears pricked forward, hackles rising in subtle ridges, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest as if scenting ghosts from yesteryears. Old Man Hawkins lingered at the market's edge, his weathered face etched with cryptic mutters about guardians awakening, his gaze heavy on Ethan and Ranger like a harbinger's omen. Tension coiled in the cottage, the fire's crackle now ominous, the air tasting of ozone and unspoken dread. Ranger's instincts flared, freezing mid-step, nose twitching at invisible trails, foreshadowing a resurgence of buried traumas, the curse's tendrils stirring once more. The cottage door creaked open like a reluctant confession, admitting Old Man Hawkins with his stooped frame and eyes shadowed by the brim of his weathered hat, the scent of pipe tobacco and ancient dust trailing him like ghosts. Ethan stiffened, Ranger at his side, the dog's hackles rising in a ridge of black and tan fury, a growl bubbling deep as Hawkins murmured cryptic fragments, "The guardian stirboy, the order's blood runs thick in that beast." Frustration ignited in Ethan like dry tinder, his voice erupting in a shout that echoed off the walls. "Speak plainly, damn it, what curse, what treasure?" Hawkins' gaze flicked to Ranger, who snarled with protective zeal, body positioning between man and intruder, his maternal instincts forged in lineage's fire flaring against perceived threat. Flashbacks assaulted them for Ranger, visions of a cruel hand wielding chains under moonlit abandonment, the abuser's voice, a thunderclap of betrayal. For Ethan, echoes of his lost love's warnings about delving too deep, now mirrored in this intrusion. Panic surged Ethan's hands, shaking as he paced, words tumbling in a torrent. Why us? Why now? While Ranger's aggression, peaked teeth bared in a display rooted in trauma's soil. Hawkins retreated a step, his silence cracking only to whisper, "The order's last I am." The dog's bark unlocks what was sealed. The room pulsed with emotion, walls closing in like judgment, Ranger's eyes wild with recognition of shadowed kin, Ethan's chest heaving with the weight of resurfaced pain. Withdrawal followed the explosion. Ethan slumping into a chair, face buried in hands, Ranger pressing close but tense, their bond strained yet unbreaking in the storm of revelation. Twilight bled into the village like an open wound, the air heavy with impending rain, as a stranger emerged from the wood's maw, his silhouette tall and menacing, boots crunching gravel like bones underfoot. The man's face was a map of hard lines, eyes cold as forgotten steel, and Ranger's reaction was instantaneous. A snarl ripping from his throat body, lowering into a primal crouch recognition, flashing like lightning in his amber gaze. Ethan stepped onto the porch, heart slamming against ribs, the stranger's voice cutting through the dusk. "That dog's mine, Ryder. Hand him over." The claim hung like a noose, the man's presence a tangible threat, his hand twitching toward a concealed pocket as if ready to enforce old cruelties. Ranger positioned himself as shield hackles, a bristling crown growls, escalating to barks that echoed ancestral fury, the curse's enforcer the abuser from flashbacks of chained knights and whispered maledictions. Ethan's mind reeled, piecing fragments. This was the shadowy figure who'd abandoned Ranger, the one tied to the secret order's dark underbelly, now returned to claim the Guardian for the treasure's ritual. The standoff thickened, words volleying like arrows. "He's not yours anymore." Ethan's spat voice laced with defiance, born of newfound bond, while the stranger advanced a sneer, twisting his lips, hinting at the hidden trove's power. Physical tension mounted Ranger, lunging forward, but restrained by Ethan's command, the man's fist clenching air electric with violence's promise. Emotional undercurrents surged, Ethan's fear for Ranger mirroring the dog's protective rage flashbacks, interweaving the abuser's past blows, landing on Ranger's flanks now paralleled in threats to their fragile peace. The confrontation peaked in a charged silence, the stranger's eyes narrowing on the runes, etched in memory, his retreat a temporary yield, but laden with menace. "The moon calls. You'll see." Rain began to fall, washing the scene in sheets, but the primal clash lingered, a flashpoint etching deeper scars into their shared narrative. The stranger's footsteps faded into the rain-slicked night, leaving the porch slick and the air heavy with unresolved menace, like a storm that had passed but promised return. Ethan slumped against the doorframe, breath ragged, his hands trembling as he raked them through his hair, regret flooding in waves. Why didn't I fight harder? What if he comes back? Ranger pressed close head, nudging Ethan's knee with insistent warmth, the dog's body a solid anchor amid the emotional debris. Silence enveloped them, thick and comforting, broken only by the drip of Eve's and Ranger's soft pants. Ethan knelt, arms encircling the German shepherd in a loose embrace, feeling the faint scars under fur, a physical echo of their shared turmoil. The dog didn't pull away, instead leaning in a quiet reaffirmation that mended the fracture from the confrontation. Physical separation dissolved as they moved inside, Ranger trailing Ethan like a shadow settling at his feet by the fire, close protective of vow etched in proximity. Hawkins' distant figure melted into the gloom, but his secrets no longer loomed as threats. Instead, the moment sealed a pact of mutual safeguard, closing the chapter on immediate dread. Ethan's fingers buried in Ranger's ruff, drawing strength from the steady heartbeat, their bond fortified in the aftermath's hush, a promise whispered without words. "We're in this together no matter the shadows." Whispers slithered through the underbrush like invisible serpents, the woods awakening under a moon veiled in gossamer clouds, its light filtering in fractured beams that danced erratically on the forest floor. Ranger led the way, nose to the ground, ears swiveling at every rustle, a fallen leaf crunching underfoot, a distant owl's hoot, slicing the night like a warning. Ethan followed, flashlight beam jittering with his uneven breaths, the air thick with pine and damp earth laced with an undercurrent of something metallic, unnatural. The runes on the stone marker glowed brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat from the earth's core, drawing them deeper into the tangle of roots and shadows. Hawkins's voice echoed in Ethan's mind, his earlier warning at the cottage door. "The guardians test the worthy, fail, and the curse claims all." Heightening the watchfulness, every snap of twig amplifying unease. Ranger's body language spoke volumes, tail low, but alert muscles coiled like springs. His occasional glance back a silent urging to press on. Subtle signs mounted, a chill wind carrying faint chants, animal eyes glinting from the undergrowth before vanishing. Ranger's growl, a low vibration foretelling peril. The hunt felt alive, the woods a labyrinth of instincts and omens. Tension building like a storm on the horizon, man and dog bound in vigilant pursuit of the treasure's heart. The woods parted like a curtain drawn by invisible hands, revealing a clearing bathed in unnatural luminescence, the runes now blazing like veins of fire etched into the earth. A spectral figure materialized from the mist, ethereal yet imposing, cloaked in swirling shadows that whispered ancient oaths, its eyes glowing with the curse's insatiable hunger. The Guardian's voice. It intoned voice echoing like wind through hollow bones. "Unlock the trove or forfeit your souls." Ranger bristled, a ferocious growl ripping from his depths, body poised for battle as the air grew thick, oppressive, the ground trembling faintly under the weight of impending doom. Ethan staggered, flashlight dropping, his analytical mind fracturing under the assault. The figures demand a direct siege on their bond, threatening to wrench Ranger's bark for its ritualistic key. Physical decline gripped them, Ranger's legs buckling slightly under an unseen force, fur standing on end, as if electrified, while Ethan's vision blurred, knees weakening from the spectral drain, the curse siphoning life like a leech. Imminent loss loomed, the treasure's glow pulsing nearby, tempting yet deadly, the figure advancing with outstretched hand, its touch promising oblivion. Ranger lunged weakly, teeth snapping at air loyalty, unyielding, despite the toll, forcing Ethan to confront the inescapable, surrender the dog, or face annihilation together. The clearing pulsed with tension, leaves rustling in frantic symphony, the moon above a merciless witness to the test's cruel unfolding. In the heart of the glowing clearing, Ethan's world narrowed to the spectral figure's demand, the air crackling with ethereal energy that tugged at Ranger's essence, the dog's body arching in agony, as if strings pulled him toward the runes. Ethan's mind raced, a torrent of logic and emotion, colliding the treasure's lure, a cascade of ancient gold and power, shimmering just beyond reach, promising to mend his fractured life, yet at the cost of betraying the one soul who thawed his heart. "No," he rasped, voice gaining steel, stepping between the apparition and Ranger, his hand finding the dog's ruff in a grip of fierce resolve. The decision crystallized like ice in his veins, protection over power, bond over bounty, as he shouted, "He's not yours to command." Ranger, sensing the shift, rallied with a defiant bark, not the cursed summons, but a roar of unity, shattering the spectral hold like glass under hammer. The figure recoiled, shadows fracturing its form, dissipating in wisps of smoke as the runes dimmed the curse's chains, snapping audibly in the night. Emotional resolution washed over them. Ethan's tears, mingling with rain that began to fall soft and cleansing as he knelt beside Ranger, arms enveloping the exhausted dog, their breaths sinking in triumphant harmony. The action was irreversible, a commitment etched in the earth's memory, the treasure fading into obscurity, unimportant now against the warmth of loyalty preserved. Sensory details enveloped the catharsis, the scent of ozone and wet fur, the tremble in Ranger's frame, easing under Ethan's touch, the woods sighing in relief as moonlight softened. Their bond forged in fire emerged unbreakable, the climax's peak yielding to quiet victory, man and dog standing as one against the vanishing threat. Dawn crept over the village like a gentle sigh, the sky blushing in soft pinks and golds that filtered through the cottage windows, casting long, languid shadows across the worn floorboards. Ethan stirred on the couch, body aching from the night's ordeal, his hand instinctively reaching for Ranger, who lay curled at his feet, chest rising and falling in slow, even rhythms. The air hung still, scented with residual rain and the faint musk of fur, the fire reduced to glowing embers that popped sporadically like distant memories fading. Hawkins appeared at the threshold, his knock a soft tap, entering with a nod, and unfolding the tale, the secret order's origins, Ranger's lineage. As the last guardian, the curse now shattered like fragile glass. Ethan listened in hushed reverence, fingers idly stroking Ranger's ear, the dog's eyes half opening in contented slits, no tension in his frame. Minimal movements marked the scene, a shift of weight, a deep breath, the subtle lean of Ranger against Ethan's leg, sentences stretching long with pauses heavy in emotion. The village outside stirred lazily, unaware of the shifted world, as man and dog decompressed, the crisis's echo, softening into survival's quiet embrace, a fragile peace settling like dew on grass. The days unfolded in a steady tempo, like the measured tick of a grandfather clock, the cottage transforming into a cocoon of gradual renewal, where small actions wove threads of healing between Ethan and Ranger. Mornings began with shared walks through mist-kissed fields, Ranger trotting at Ethan's side, his nose twitching at scents of wildflowers and damp soil, tail wagging in loose rhythmic arcs that mirrored Ethan's easing stride. Back home, the dog ate from Ethan's hand, warm kibble passing from palm to muzzle, the contact lingering fur brushing skin in a sensory dance of trust. Ethan's fingers tracing faded scars with gentle reverence. Evenings by the fire saw Ranger following Ethan's movements, lying close, with head on paws, eyes tracking the man's pen as it scratched across pages, inspiration flowing anew in stories of curses broken and bonds forged. Their behaviors intertwined, Ethan pausing to murmur affirmations, Ranger responding with a nudge or lick, the air filled with the soft huff of breaths, sinking the crackle of logs, the faint warmth radiating from their proximity. Over time, the bond deepened silently, Ranger sleeping at the foot of the bed, Ethan waking to the dog's watchful gaze, emotions mirroring in subtle shifts, a shared glance during thunderstorms, no flinch but solidarity. Sensory richness enveloped their recovery, the texture of fur underhand, the earthy scent post-walk, the quiet tempo of routines building like a symphony's crescendo, healing not in grand gestures, but in the interwoven fabric of daily life, man and dog emerging whole from the shadows. The next full moon rose like a polished pearl, its light spilling through the cottage window in a serene cascade, illuminating Ethan and Ranger as they stepped into the garden, the grass cool and dewy underfoot. Ranger paused, head tilting upward, his silhouette sharp against the glow, and then a single bark, not the haunted summons of old, but a resonant note of triumph, echoing softly into the night like a released sigh. Ethan smiled, hand descending to rest on the dog's head fingers, weaving through fur in a gesture of profound intimacy, their breaths mingling in the crisp air, eyes locking in shared release. The motion was intimate. Deliberate Rangers lean into the touch, Ethan's steady gaze, the subtle rise and fall of chests, sinking in emotional catharsis. The village slumbered below, oblivious to the curse's dissolution as man and dog walked side-by-side steps in harmony, marking a quiet rebirth, where fear's echo faded into hope's whisper.